Hey, welcome back to our channel. We are Kim and Sloane Petersen with the Petersen Group at Keller Williams, and today we are here to talk about why the housing market is not going to crash in 2022.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for joining us today. And I'm sure you guys have been hearing a lot in the headlines that a foreclosure market is coming or that we're going to crash. I know when I'm online on Facebook groups or feeds, I'm constantly hearing investors and just other people just talking about, that we're in a bubble and that we're going to crash and all these things. And so as though we can't predict the market, right? We don't have a crystal ball. Nobody knows if we're going to have a catastrophe happening next year or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? And that makes people nervous. Yeah. However, we do have key indicators that we track that people that are a lot smarter even than us, obviously, are tracking that your key economic professors and leaders in the nation. So we just wanted to talk about a little bit about that and just kind of go over the things that we've been studying and why we do not think that we're headed into anything like a crash. Obviously, corrections happen, and we want to talk about the difference between a correction and an actual crash. So in history, we've actually only experienced two housing crashes, and I don't know if people realize that or not. Obviously, the first one is going to be the Great Depression, right, which was caused by war and a lot of different sort of things. And then the second one was 2008, which was caused by a number of things as well. A few of those things, just to point out, was an oversupply problem, right? We had builders that were building, and Kim will talk about that in a little bit, but they were building around 24 million houses per decade, and now we're kind of seeing that go down a little bit. So we also see like high interest rates, right? So we are seeing that a little bit now, and people are kind of thinking, oh, that's reminiscence of 2008. Mm-hmm. But even right now, right, we've seen a 4 to 4.5%, which is, for us, it seems crazy, right? A lot of people that have only been in the market or buying houses since, 2015 may feel like that's an extreme hike, right? And with prices raising, yes, that does hurt us a little bit. You do feel that in the pocketbook. But realistically speaking, normal interest rates are healthy anyway, would be about 5%, 5 to 6%. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen that since the Great Recession of 2008. We hit close to that a few years ago, and then it immediately dropped, right back down. So we are seeing 4 to 4.5. A lot of that is because of the uncertainty with Ukraine and Russia and all that kind of stuff that's going on. It also is because the Feds do want to raise interest rate, right? They sell the loans to the secondary market, and those investors that pick those up don't really want to buy millions or $1 billion worth of loans at a 2.5% interest rate. So of course, they do want to see that 5%, and that is how we also hedge off inflation, right? And for those of you that don't understand, inflation comes from a market that's too hot, right? It means that we're buying at an alarming rate, and we don't have the supply for that. So then inflation starts happening, which is kind of where we're at now. So I just want to bring this up on the screen really quick. I want to show you guys the last 6 recessions in the United States. They range all the way back from 1980. And as you can see, the first one in 1980, we have a 6.1% appreciation gain during the recession. And then in 1981, we see a 3.5% gain in the recession. And then the first drop we've seen in the recessions was in 1991. We see a 3%. And then in 2001, again, another 6.6% appreciation gain. Of course, in 2008, we've seen the Great Recession, which was a national average of a 19.7 drop in value, which, is what we all remember. So in 2008 is when we seen, the Great Recession happen, which we've seen a 19.7% drop in appreciation gains. And that was caused by a number of things, right? So part of it was a fraud type thing. We did have people like straw buyers and things like that came into play, which was fraudulent. We had appraisers being bought off. We had predatory lending, right? Subprime mortgages, things like that. I mean, I don't know if you guys were in the market. Some of you probably were, but if you remember refinancing prior to 2008, you didn't even have to give them your income, right? You just said, you know what, this is what I make. They didn't even verify that, and they said, here's the money, right? Yeah. We also had people that were just coming in and cashing out, right? They were taking out huge chunks of money, and they weren't putting that back into a house or other investing options. They were just taking that out and going to Disneyland, buying a Harley, something stupid like that. And so it really does, people right now, we have an average of $160,000 average appreciation in most, or equity anyway, in most people's houses. And people aren't taking that out and going and using it recklessly, right? If they are using it, they're upgrading their house, or they're buying an investment property, something like that. So we don't have that same sort of issue that we've seen back then. And Utah did weather the storm a lot better, right? We've seen only a 12% drop in appreciation, and that did last. I didn't want you guys to, one thing I want to point out is recessions usually only last 18 months or so, right? And we had another one on the screen you can see is 2020, right? That was our last recession. People pumped the brakes on buying stuff, and that we still seen a 9.2% gain, and in Utah it was actually much higher than that, right? We've seen more of like a 15% increase. So anyway, the main point I want you to take away from there is recessions do not cause housing issues. They don't cause housing drops. They can if they're caused by housing, like 2008, it was caused by a housing issue, right? Whereas, a lot of these other recessions were not caused by anything that had to do with housing. They were dot-com bubbles or financing as far as credit cards, things like that. So Kim is going to talk about the difference in what the builders have been doing, and we're also going to bring up this on the screen so you can see what we're talking about as well.
Yeah, and a point I want to make to that before I move on to the supply and demand issue is a lot of times recessions are caused, or housing crashes are caused by job loss, right? And I read an article the other day that Utah is actually at the lowest unemployment rate it's ever been since it's been a state, which is 2.1%. So, I mean, that's a big part of when we talk about crashes is if people can afford homes. Well, jobs are in plenty right now. So, but skirting over to the supply and demand issue, as you can see on the graph that we've pulled up, that obviously home building has decreased by a substantial amount within the last few years. When the crash happened, a lot of builders went out of business, or they didn't want to get back into building because they had been through the crash and had seen a big hit in their businesses. Even if you did survive the storm, I mean, that was a lot for a lot of people to go through in terms of building. So a lot of people didn't want to come back into the business, and so building really ceased for a long time. And, and so did buying. So it kind of matched up for a number of years, right? We weren't really seeing the hit like we are now because, unfortunately, when building stopped, it really stopped. It dropped. The numbers went down substantially, and permits also got harder to get after the crash happened, right? We were like, we've got enough buildings. We need to sell this inventory before we even think about building again. Well, in the interim, when we bounced back from the crash, people started buying at a high rate. We had, an influx of people coming into Utah because our economy bounced back beautifully. We are, always have been leading in the economy in Utah. And so we've got a lot of people moving here. We've had big families where generations are starting to purchase homes now, and that's never caught up. And so as you can see from the graph, I mean, 5.8, that's very, very little in comparison to the amount of homes we need. We are, I think if you can remember from the last time we talked about the market, we're about 44,000 homes short year over year for the past couple of years. That's adding up, and we are really starting to see that. And so that has really created that supply and demand issue. We are very short on supply, and we are very high on demand. That's why our market is insane right now, and it's going to continue being insane regardless of outside factors that are happening. Like we talked about, unemployment rates are super low. People are still purchasing homes, and they still need to purchase homes. And as long as that's lasting, we're not going to see a housing crash.
Exactly. I just want to point out to the huge deficit, right? So we see 2.7 million homes were built in the last decade of 2000 to 2009. And really we had above 20 million for what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decades, 7 decades that were above 20 million, right? And so we go from 27 million between 2000 and 2009 all the way down to 5.8 million. So even if everyone's like, well, I see building, right? They're building everywhere. So we're going to have all this big supply. We're going to have a correction in the market. Stuff's going to drop down. And everyone's going to be left holding the bag, right? It just doesn't make sense, right? Logically, like I get that everyone's scared. It worries me, the trajectory we've been going to. But when you start breaking this down a little bit, you got to take your emotions out of it and look at the stats and go, you know what? I get it, right? I get that most everyone, right, went through that recession, the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And it was rough on us, right? And we have PTSD from that. However, we can't look at that and let that make our decisions going forward because it's just not the same. It's not true when people are saying that. And I want to shift this a little bit to talk about foreclosures, right? Because people are like, we had this big forbearance thing. Everyone that put their homes in forbearance are now going to start becoming foreclosed, right? And so I did see an article the other day that showed that we have a huge increase of defaults, right? Defaults are not the same as foreclosures, and you guys need to understand that. And the difference between a default and a foreclosure is a default just means you're behind in your payment. A foreclosure is when you're actually like they're taking it from you, right? There's no reason anybody should be foreclosing on their home unless they did do what we did in the past, right? And they took that equity out, went to Disneyland, or maybe they did use it for something that was even more important, right? Like a health issue or whatever. Then yeah, I mean, it is what it is. There's nothing you can do, but you're gonna go bankrupt anyway. If you have a big health issue like that, having a lot of equity in your home might not even be enough to fight off that. So if you are in that situation, yeah, we are seeing defaults, but the market's just going to absorb those like nothing, right? We have less than 10% of all loans in Utah that are in a default. I mean, even in a forbearance, less than that. I think less than 1% are in a default. And even across the nation, it's super low. But defaults don't mean foreclosures. They do have that equity. So speaking of equity, we want to talk a little bit more about that, what that looks like. And in the last 4 years, we've seen 68% increases in prices, and that's being pretty modest, right? Because in 2008 we seen around a 10% increase, 2019 a 12%, and then 2020 18%, and then 2021 the hugest we've ever seen, right, at 28%. So even people are like, well, yeah, for those of you that bought 4 years ago, you're okay, right? And just to defeat that argument as well is if you bought last year, you have 28%, right? So let's go back to the fear mongering of we are going to crash and we're going to hit a recession that's going to drop the market down by 20% or more. Well, that's happened twice in history. The Great Depression and the Great Recession. We call them great for a reason. They were anomalies, right? They weren't normal. There was a perfect storm. So even if, let's entertain the fear mongering and say that it is going to be a 20% drop, right? If you bought your home just 1 year ago, you're still 8% above, right? And we are going to see a correction probably. Is it going to be next year, the year after that? Who knows, right? None of us know. But a correction doesn't mean a crash. A correction could be going from 28% down to 6%, right? And so as we did in our cost of waiting video, you can see that if you want, we have it in the description if you want to go into that video as well. But we're projecting a 12 to 15% appreciation gain this year again. And we do our market even on 6%, right? So if we drop to 6%, I have a $400,000 house, that's $24,000 of equity, right? And people are like, well, if we're paying 20% more than the market value is worth, right? If we have a crash and we're in trouble. Right, if it goes down, right? If not, it might take you longer to build back up, maybe 3 to 5 years like it used to take. But it's just not likely that we're going to see any sort of crash. So
yeah, and I think a couple of things to remember is when we talk about a correction, technically we're seeing a correction this year, right? Mm-hmm. Last year we did a 28% equity gain. We're projected 15%. That's technically correcting the market. We're going down in equity, but we're still up because we are so far up. And then the second thing to remember is it's really only been in the last few years that you could live in your home and even have equity. When my parents bought, you would have to live in your home for 5 to 7 years to be able to sell and make money off of it. I mean, now the average is more 2 to 5 years. So I think we're just remembering a time in real estate when everything's really crazy and we expect it to be that way. But in normal markets, it stabilizes and you do have to earn that equity a little bit more.
Yeah, and then we're going to end this video because I was getting a little bit long, but just going back to one more thing I want to make sure you guys are aware of is again, think about we've had 2 crashes in a 100-year cycle, right? Real estate is cyclical, that is true. We do see it go up and down, but up and down doesn't mean you're losing money, right? It means that the appreciation and the gains are going up and down. And some, you're going to see little anomalies, right? Like some markets in little cities are going to maybe see a down. The same thing we've seen in Detroit, right? When GM went down, it's going to take that whole state down. But historically speaking, and looking at stats for the whole United States, it's just not looking that way. And so I just want you guys to make sure that you're making a factual, informed decision and not one just based off of a headline that's scary, right? So if you want to talk about this deeper, we would love to have a conversation with you. If you're not locally, right, give us a call, or if you want to just DM us, we would love to have this conversation with you and just go over like where we think it's going. And this is not our opinion, right? And everyone can have an opinion, right? I can say that the world's flat and doesn't mean anything, right? That's my opinion, but have an opinion is at least based on statistical data that makes sense.
Absolutely. Again, thank you guys for joining us. Call us, DM us. We love to hear from you. As always, we are keeping it real estate. Bye.